Welcome to Friday and the end of quite a week, and welcome to Meet the Press Daily. I'm Chuck Todd here in Washington. Democrats are fast-tracking their investigation into the president in Ukraine, which is at the heart of their impeachment inquiry. In some breaking news just a few moments ago, 3 House committees, including the Intelligence Committee, which will be taking the lead on this investigation, announced that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had been subpoenaed for documents relating to their inquiry. And these committees tell Pompeo point blank that, quote, "Your failure or refusal to comply with the subpoena shall constitute evidence of obstruction of the House's impeachment inquiry." The committees also announced that they'd scheduled depositions for 5 State Department officials over the next 2 weeks. Nearly all of those witnesses were mentioned by name in the whistleblower complaint that was made public yesterday. As we told you, that whistleblower complaint is your guide to a witness list. In the letter to Pompeo, Democrats note that Giuliani's recent public statements have raised troubling questions about the State Department's involvement in the president's efforts with Ukraine. And yes, seemingly at the intersection of every avenue of this scandal is the president's personal attorney and friend, Rudy Giuliani. We're learning the full picture of how alarmed some White House officials were with Giuliani, and we're learning just how little Giuliani seems to care about that. In fact, here he is responding to reporting in the New York Times that Secretary of State Pompeo himself was angry at the role Giuliani was playing with Ukraine.
If it weren't for me, nobody would have uncovered and faced massive corruption by the Vice President of the United States. In fact, I'm a legitimate whistleblower, and his State Department, asked me to do this. So, Mike, if you're unhappy with me, I'm sorry, but I accomplished my mission. I have no idea if he's unhappy with me or not. I frankly don't care.
We're also learning the extent of his communications with Ukrainians. With the help of some incredible reporting by my colleague Richard Engel, who spoke on camera with Ukraine's former prosecutor general that was at the center of some of this. Bottom line, it's hard to see how Democrats fast-track their work without going through Rudy Giuliani. He's all over this timeline. He's all over the president's call with Zelensky. And he's, frankly, all over the place in what he's telling us he's been doing. So let's try to dive into what we're learning. With me now, our NBC News White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, who also covered Capitol Hill for years. And don't think I won't be using that experience with that help today. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, and Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. Kelly, I want to start with you because you had one of the first scoops of the day that seemed to confirm yet another aspect of the whistleblower report, a portion of it at least, which is, yes, there is a different, more secure server, and yes, this phone call transcript, if you want to call it that, or notes, did end up on that special server, but, and why don't you fill in the but, Kelly?
Well, as the president tries to discredit the whistleblower, or Rudy Giuliani says it's only hearsay information, White House officials do acknowledge that National Security Council lawyers took the notes and did, in fact, put them behind code word protection on a special server that would typically be reserved for the highest level secrets. And what is important to know about this is now officials are also saying, Kellyanne Conway in particular, that after the early days of the Trump administration, when some of the president's foreign leader phone calls, which are typically classified by their very nature to protect those conversations, that there were leaks that ended up being embarrassing to the president. He was criticized for the way he interacted, that they tightened up some of the procedures. So a big question is, how many of the foreign leader phone calls ended up behind this higher level of security? But the White House acknowledges that the call that has directed all of this attention and an impeachment inquiry was protected in the most secret place, the code word protected secret server, so very few people could have access to it. So it is affirming a detail that the whistleblower put forward into the complaint.
And look, it's important. So far, many of these details that the whistleblower had in the complaint continue to get, that's right, they continue to check out. Peter Baker, as usual, you got the president's personal ire today. I want to set that aside. Do they have a strategy yet? And is there a Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump strategy and then a White House strategy that are not, and can they coexist?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think that they were necessarily ready for this week. I think that as the president himself said earlier this week, they had thought that impeachment was dead. That was the phrase he used. And so they're suddenly trying to ramp up to counter the obvious momentum that the Democrats in the House have right now, driving toward an impeachment. They had some plans, they had some ideas in place for back in the summer, back in the spring, when they were worried about Robert Mueller's report. You can see some of that playing out now. They're going after individual Democrats, particularly in sensitive districts, for caving into the left. That's the phrase they use, by going along with impeachment as an inquiry. The president's own strategy clearly is make it about Biden, Biden, Biden. He's the corrupt one here, and at the very least, muddy the water so that you can't impeach me if you're not looking into him. But I think, Rudy's off on his own at times. Rudy Giuliani has his own inimitable style that seems to be sometimes a contrast even with itself.
And I think the question with Rudy is, what has he been doing in Ukraine? And who has he been meeting with, and which part of this? And for that, Richard Engel, you've spent some time in Ukraine this week trying to get to the bottom of this. You spent time with Mr. Lysenko, who is apparently one of the investigators that both helped fan the flames of this Biden news and at the same time has retracted it. What have you learned? And can we trust what's coming out of the Ukrainian government, whether this current one or the previous one?
So you listen to that astonishing quote that you played earlier from Rudy Giuliani, how he's saying he's the real whistleblower here, how he uncovered massive corruption by the Biden family, by Joe Biden in Ukraine. So the truth is, he didn't uncover massive corruption by the Biden family in Ukraine, but he has been looking for it, and he has been, and the president has been pressuring the Ukrainian government to cough it up. What we have learned is that Rudy Giuliani has been on this dirt-digging mission around the world, but focused primarily on Ukraine, talking to officials, talking to then current, now former Ukrainian prosecutors in order to get information about the former vice president and his son, Hunter Biden. And this goes back primarily to a period just after the revolution here. There was a revolution that overthrew the government in 2014. A new pro-American government came into power. And in this very sensitive time, Hunter Biden took a job as a consultant for an energy company here in Ukraine. Now, nothing illegal about that, but it did, according to Giuliani and according to some officials in this country and independent investigators, it did have the whiff of impropriety. So now Giuliani is digging into this. President Trump, you saw on that phone call, wants the new Ukrainian government to reopen its files and find some dirt on Biden. So we spoke to the former prosecutor. He said he's meeting with, or he had met with or spoken to Giuliani at least 10 times.
That's amazing. Let me play a quick excerpt, actually, of that interview you had, a quick cut-down version of it. Here it is.
Did you find any corruption by then Vice President Biden, or abuse of power, or corruption by Joe Biden's son, Hunter?
I have declared that I don't know any possible violation of Ukrainian law, once again, Ukrainian law, by Biden and Biden Jr.
Now, Richard, here's my confusion about this guy. Isn't he the same person that Giuliani put in touch with a political investigative columnist of some sort, where he gave another version of events?
So there have been multiple prosecutors here, and this particular prosecutor was involved in investigating this energy company that Hunter Biden had a contract with, received money from, and cleared the company, said that there was no wrongdoing by Biden, no wrongdoing by Joe Biden. But today, when I spoke to him, he said, yes, I did clear the company, and he just said that in the quote you just played. But he went on to say, I've been talking with Rudy Giuliani to say, well, there was no wrongdoing here in Ukraine, but maybe if the United States wants to find wrongdoing or abuse of power that was committed in the United States, that he'd be willing to cooperate with Giuliani or those close to President Trump to help them on their investigation. So he's showing a willingness to tell what he knows to President Trump and his personal envoy, Rudy Giuliani. But it's also important to understand Ukraine is in a very weak position here.
Right.
They are fighting a war. They're dependent on the Trump administration. President Trump has cut off funding, almost $400 million in military funding for Ukraine. So in that context, when President Trump is pressuring the president of the country, when the president's personal envoy is rooting around for information, and this country is fighting for its survival, you can understand why they would be willing to basically cough up whatever they have or tell the White House whatever it might be looking for.
Let me switch half gears here to the news of the last hour, which is the Pompeo subpoena, Kelly O'Donnell. Do we have an indication yet how cooperative or uncooperative the White House counsel wants everybody to be?
We don't yet. And remember, Mike Pompeo himself is a Harvard Law graduate, so he understands these issues very carefully. And part of what he's being requested for here is that as Secretary of State, he's the ultimate custodian of documents. And documents is what the committees want, these three committees that are responsible for the inquiry. And it's also so interesting, Chuck, in just the way this is all played out. When you look at the letter from the committees, so much of it is about Rudy Giuliani, his recent television appearances, his tweets, in the footnotes, Rudy Giuliani Twitter. I mean, that's the world we're living in now, are cited here because Giuliani has talked about his interactions with State Department officials. So this has also reached a subpoena level because the committees had, in prior letters to the Secretary of State, asked for information about various pieces of information from the Department of State and got nothing. So we have already been in a posture where the State Department has not provided information. So it would be a big change for the Secretary of State to provide information. But again, this is the power of a subpoena in what is now an inquiry of impeachment. That changes things, and it would seem more likely that they would be compelled to provide information. And I'm not a lawyer, so if there's a way out of that, I don't know what it would be. It is a subpoena, and there, as you mentioned, the depositions that would happen over the next couple of weeks would be government employees who work for the Department of State. Those depositions typically happen behind closed doors, not the kind of hearing we saw with the with the Director of National Intelligence.
Peter Baker, I don't want you to speculate about how this is going to end, but I will say this: there's a familiar pattern here with the president, in that you just have this feeling that Rudy Giuliani is may end up being the shield here. But just because you're the president's shield, the president may move away as you become that shield. Do you get an indication? Because I'm already feeling it from people around the White House who wish Rudy Giuliani would be the one thrown under the bus. Is that where this is headed?
Yeah, it's a great question because, of course, the extent of which Rudy Giuliani's travels and interactions with Ukrainians were known to President Trump is something we don't know, really. It's, broadly speaking, obviously, the president did know and was encouraging. In fact, he tried to facilitate it by talking to the president of Ukraine, as we saw with that, rough transcript released this week. But did he know everything that Rudy Giuliani was doing? How closely was he reporting back to him? These are all questions that we haven't had. So how much distance could he put between him and Rudy Giuliani should he choose to do it? It's not easy to imagine. So far, he's embraced Mayor Giuliani. Has not, been willing to cut him off. We don't know what would happen if push comes to shove. It's hard to imagine how he could resist a subpoena, but he might make the argument there's a legal privilege there. We're going to want to hear, obviously, the committees are definitely going to want to hear from Rudy Giuliani because he's right there in the middle of all this. Well,
look, we're going to get into that after the break, but that is one of those. He's at the center, and you got to subpoena him, but boy, that's like the scorpion and the frog, huh? Corey Lewandowski on steroids for one of those hearings, so who knows? Anyway, Kelly O'Donnell, Richard Engel, Peter Baker, covering this from 2 continents. Thanks very much, all of you. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.